You're listening to Mornings with Eric and Bridget here on Moody Radio 89.3. Am I going to feel guilty after this conversation?
Oh, we are talking about our physical bodies, so I don't know. We'll see. Our faith is not just indwelt in our spirit and our soul. Our bodies are a part of it as well, even though sometimes we don't make that connection. And Pastor Keith Case is in the studio to help us discuss this. I think when I think about this topic, when I'm like prayer walking, for example, that's a way I bring my body into worship. Is that part of what we're talking about here?
For sure. Oh, yeah. I love that idea. Yeah, just an embodiment of our faith, that our faith is a full body experience, you know? It's not just limited to this cerebral exercise, you know, which we can dive into more.
So you spent a lot of time training your mind necessarily, not your body, right? And this is kind of a new revelation for you almost?
Yeah, you know, I said, well, for me in my journey, when I came to faith, I was like 14 years old. And I was super hungry, reading the Bible every day. And I would go to my youth pastor, this guy, David Swanson. I'd go to him and kind of just bother him all the time with these questions, you know? And really, I was trying to live out like, okay, how does this apply to my relationship with my parents or this friendship or whatever? And at some point in there, he said to me, you know, Keith, I really wish I had gotten a counseling degree or gotten more training in counseling. And basically, the way I interpreted what he was saying is, Keith, I really wish I knew how to apply this to all these areas of your life, more in depth, the gospel, you know, how do we really apply it? And so it stirred in me this journey of really trying to figure out how do we do that? And then eventually I got exposed to Christian counseling that was able to really do that, really gave me these tools to apply it, to say, how do I navigate a relationship with my father, my mother, a friend of mine that we're going through a conflict, you know, because previous to that, all I really knew was like, you know, try to work it out, pray about it. You know, I didn't have these tools to really navigate it. And once I got these tools, then I felt like to apply the gospel to a deeper part of my own life and to my friend, you know, as we were having this conversation. It was like literally getting the tools to look at the log in my own eye, if that makes sense. And that whole thing opened me up to, I really want us to have a more holistic discipleship as Christians, not just one that targets our minds. I come from a Presbyterian background, which you guys know, and we and some of our other brothers and sisters out there from other denominations, we're very cerebral people. You know, when we get ordained, it's like taking the bar exam as a lawyer, right? And so we very much have this emphasis on the mind, which, you know, there's positives to it, but there could be negatives.
And the negative being we forget there are other parts of who we are. I mean, we think about our Heavenly Father as triune.
Yeah.
And is that reflective on the parts of our being?
Yeah. I mean, you know, when you go back to Genesis 1 and he says, you know, Moses recaptures the story of creation. He says that God created us in his image. And we are sitting here all of a sudden with bodies, you know, like he's pulled the dust together, breathed life into it, and now we're these walking bodies. And in some way, our bodies, not just the spiritual part, but the bodies are a reflection of who God is. Like that one's still kind of a mystery to me. I'm like, what is that all about? You know, and then Paul picks up on that analogy, talking about the church being the body of Christ, and then each of us is like a body part in the body. So it's, you know, there's some really cool things in there for us to think about. And
but there's disconnects, right? I mean, there's not too many seminaries have a great basketball program or a football team. They're there for the intellect part of it. So,
yes.
Well, we've had this disconnect for years, though.
Yeah. And you know, one of the things that I go back to Genesis all the time, and I'll just mention it really quickly, that the first thing that happens in Genesis 3 when Adam and Eve sin is that they run and hide. And what do they hide? Their bodies. So there seems to be very early on this shame connected to our bodies. And then later on, you have these influences that have a big impact on the church, like the Greek philosophers like Plato and then Neoplatism. These come and have an influence on Augustine, who Augustine is, you know, one of the early church fathers who has a huge impact, not just on the Catholic Church, but the Protestant church as well. But Plato says, basically, your body is just a little prison for your soul, and that essentially your soul will be set free from your body. And that's kind of the journey of life. And Augustine doesn't fully buy into that, but he is influenced by it. And you see it through his writing, and you see it have an impact in the church. I mean, that's one of these big things that has an impact. It's like our body is almost seen as a negative, bad thing, and then the spirit is a good thing. And then you get it kind of amplified as well with rationalism and the Enlightenment that takes it not so much with body, soul, but within the body, the mind is superior to the rest of the body. And James K. Smith, who's a theologian, says that the model from Enlightenment was that we're a brain on a stick. Not the biblical picture, but it's the one that we have been given in the West.
Yeah, but the biblical picture we see in the incarnation.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I think that's, one of the craziest things to me is probably one of the most radical things about our Christian faith is that we believe God became a human, that he was fully divine and fully human in Jesus. This wedding together of the material and spiritual world. And it's really been a huge, impactful theological teaching for me that has, especially as a therapist and a pastor, that I don't know if anything else has had a bigger impact than that reality, and has led me from being a cerebral guy to start being connected to more of my body, to be more embodied, if you will, that there's a full human experience that Jesus is inviting us into, not just a cerebral experience.
Our bodies are also called a temple. You read through the Old Testament, there's a lot of, you look at the tabernacle and the temple, there's a lot of information there about how this is built and how precious it is. And the just the materials used to build it are immense and special.
Yes.
And we don't look at ourselves that way, do we?
Yeah, sadly we don't. I find that often it's that story of shame that we see in Genesis 3. A lot of us have had that experience. Social media today, I mean, it's not a new thing. This is like a thing that's been around for a long time. But when you think about young girls being influenced by TikTok and things like that, and the body image stuff, and it used to just be, young girls who were dealing with this. Now we see it with young boys as well. That this image of how our body is supposed to be presented in this like perfect way, and it really becomes like a performative type of narrative around the body instead of, oh, this is this gift you've been given, and how you treat it is like an act of worship. That we're to be, treat our bodies as if we're loving, the same way we're called to love our neighbors, we're also called to love our bodies and care for our bodies. Be gentle with our bodies, be compassionate with our bodies. It's not the narrative that we hear a lot.
We're talking with Keith Case, who is a therapist and a pastor. We're talking about that fully embodied faith, and we have gotten it wrong. We see that in so many different areas, even in our culture, right? Even the loneliness epidemic, you said, is kind of systematic of that.
Yeah, the whole like disconnection from our bodies is also, disconnection from each other. Because when you have a disconnected lived experience, if you're living in a cerebral kind of world where everything is just up here, you're not fully connected to your whole body. And emotions, right? Our emotions are more of a core expression. Emotions are how we connect to one another, right? What makes a really good radio live is like the emotions that we're experiencing, and you can connect. Oh, when he said shame, right? Both of you guys like reacted. You felt the shame of that moment, and that's where connection happens. And if we are just living in our heads and we're not fully connected to our whole body experience, then we live in a disconnected way. I gave this example. Actually, I was doing a couples counseling session this week. And I was telling them, I was working with this couple on being more connected to their emotions. And I said, if you had seen me for counseling before I went through counseling and I just had formulas and I just had theory, I would have sat back when you guys gave, comments or whatever, and I would have just been analyzing. And maybe in 5 minutes after you guys said what you said, I would have been like, okay, well, this is what I'm seeing happening right now, and you and da-da-da-da. But instead, in the moment, because I've become more connected to my body, I'm able to feel things and speak it in the moment and say, maybe the husband is talking about some traumatic experience, and I'm like, oh my gosh, man, I am so sorry that you experienced that. Like, I feel so sad right now. And it's not something I'm having to think about. I'm just speaking from an embodied experience. I'm like in the moment with them. I'm present. Does that make sense?
Yeah, almost, you can tell the difference between someone who's just writing a song and someone who's lived life and is writing a song.
Yes.
That's what I think you're talking about, because
Yes.
they understand better the emotion that you're feeling listening to that song because they've lived it out also.
Oh yeah, that, like if you watch The Voice or you watch
Yeah.
any of those shows, they'll say, you're so connected to what you're singing. And if Jesus did anything, he reconnected us, right? He reconnected us with God through his life. He reconnected us with each other, and he also reconnects us with ourselves. And this is the thing that I really try to emphasize to people at our church is if the grace of God is real, which I believe it is 100%, nothing can separate us from God's love. And he has opened the door for us to become students and be curious about ourselves and be curious about our own experiences. So how was the body talked about in your family growing up? How were bodies treated? In my family, we did not pay a lot of attention to our bodies. If you were a boy and you were hurting and growing up in my culture, it was like, get over it. If you're in sports, you broke your finger, like put it back in place, keep going. And so it's just kind of this like neglect or denial of what the body is trying to say to us. But the body is a way in God, which God speaks to us. Your stomach hurts. There's a reason. It might not just be illness. It might be you're carrying anxiety. Get curious. What is that anxiety about? We have this God who invites us into it, like, don't worry. But what is it that I'm worrying about? I need to explore that, not just try to get rid of the worry. I need to be curious about it. And then I can understand, oh, I'm worried because of this and this and this. And, if I get some understanding and context, then the worry begins to dissipate.
I'm directly thinking of Mr. Rogers.
Oh, yes.
His 1968, was it yesterday, was the first airing of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Wow.
And you talk about move gently or understanding your body. He talked about these things and showed these things on that show to children.
Yes.
Teaching them these things each and every day almost.
Each and every day. And I'll be honest, when I was a kid, I did not get it. I
Right.
was like, you're so weird. What are you doing? But as I've gotten older, I mean, he's had a profound impact on my life. He's also a Presbyterian pastor,
Yeah.
by the way. But, he would come in and he had this routine and he was so gentle and kind. And, he has this thing that he says where I've never met anybody that I didn't fall in love with once I got to know their story, which has had a profound impact on my own life. But his gentleness was such a model to kids. And you see how culturally it was weird. People are like, what? Because we've been so influenced by kind of a Greek dualism, not just in our culture, but in our church as well.
Yeah, some of us have had that hate-love relationship with our body. You talked about going back to our childhood. So what are some of those practical tips you can give us to reconnect?
Yeah, so I love what you said, Bridget, about walking in prayer, getting your body moving. For me, a big thing has become breathing, right? Breath work. The whole idea when you go back to Genesis, where after God kind of brings us together, this dust, and then he breathes life into us, that word for breath is inspiration, that God inspires us. So when I think about my prayer life, I think about breathing, right? So if I'm still and I'm just breathing, I am connecting to my breath. I feel I'm connecting to God's inspiration, the life that he's giving to me. It's not the only thing I do in my prayer life, but it has become a big thing. Another thing that I do, and this is more I do in counseling sessions, but anybody can do this, is while I'm talking to people in a session, I'll say, what are you feeling? And some people are able to answer that better than others. Not to speak in generalities, but often women have an easier time answering that question than men do.
I can't believe you just said that. Wow.
But if a man is able to say, I feel angry or I am scared or whatever it is, I'll ask him, well, where do you feel it in your body? And they'll say like, oh, I feel anxiety. Where? And I feel it right in the center of my chest. And I'll invite them, can you just put your hand and make contact with that place? And it's wild to see their facial expression change, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, I am recognizing this in my body right now. And I'm having a connection here. And I never let myself be connected in this way. And so this is like an experience anybody can do. What are you feeling? If you can just stop, do an assessment of your body. I'm feeling stress. Okay, where are you feeling stress? Feel it in my shoulders. Can you just, put your hand on your shoulder just to make contact? So breath work, making connection like that. A big thing for me has been I surf. So I surf as much as I can with my kids, getting out in creation. Out in nature, it invites us to be more fully connected, not just to creation, but to our bodies, right? And there's Hillary McBride, she's one of the leading psychologists in this space, who's written a lot of stuff about being connected with our bodies. And she's somebody that I would definitely recommend as well as a resource.
Mm.
Well, it is better understanding who we are as believers and who our Heavenly Father sees us as. I mean, that's where the disconnect all starts, is we have a lack of understanding of how he sees us, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, the reality that Jesus came in a human body, right? If you go back to that Genesis story of the shame that we have, the first thing we hide is our bodies. And then God comes into this world in a body to say, you don't have to be ashamed of your body. Like this is part of my artwork, right? And the incarnation, what I hear so much in that invitation is, I want to be fully present with you all. Are you okay being fully present with yourself? Not just in some spiritual sense, but in your body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that holistic discipleship, a fully embodied faith. That's what we've been talking about today with Pastor Keith Case. And I hope you'll join us again, because these talks are always so helpful and enlightening. Head to our website to find out more about him, ericandbridget.org.
And we'll have a link to this conversation there just after 9 o'clock this morning. If you missed it or want to share it with others, you can also text the word LISTEN, and we'll send you that link, 561-737-6035.
Hey, my name is Brant Hansen, and I have a tough job. I have